The case that we'll be covering today is one that is not only perplexing, but utterly terrifying. It is also one that piqued my interest pretty early on in my research of the paranormal. And as I've started to do, this is a revisited story, which means that I'm correcting any previous false information from my original research throughout the video, adding new information to the case, and I've remastered the video and audio for a better watching experience. I'm also coming on camera a little more often to prove to YouTube and hopefully the wider audience, or perhaps those that aren't familiar with my work that happen to stumble upon it, that I am certainly not AI. So I just wanted to get that out there. I did also want to give a quick shout out to Isabel, who's done some editing work for me in the past, and she made me this really cool protection pendant. And I believe it's amethyst, if I'm not mistaken. There's also a blessed medallion and a picture of Saint Michael the Archangel. So thank you very much, Isabel. Fun fact, my middle name's actually Michael, and it was named after Saint Michael the Archangel. So thanks, Mom and Dad. But without further ado, let's re-explore the chilling story of the haunting of Bobby Mackey's music world and the possession of Carl Lawson here on Mystery Archives.
When a man goes to fulfill his dream, what price is he willing to pay? Is it worth losing everything he loves? Is it worth awakening an old evil? A force that seems determined to attack the living and overtake the weak. This story is a strange and unique tale of a place where a portal to hell is said to exist. This is the untold story of the demonic Bobby Mackey's music world, located in Wilder, Kentucky. And this is not a story you want to experience with the lights off. Our story begins in Wilder, Kentucky, where an abandoned music hall now sits off the banks of the Licking River. Country singer Bobby Mackey visits the property with a real estate agent in search of fulfilling a lifelong dream. After hitting success in the music scene, allowing him to leave his job at the railroad and pursue music full-time, he's been on the road touring for nearly 12 years. He loves what he does, but he loves someone more, his wife Janet, who's pregnant with their first child. Wanting to settle down and plant some roots, start a family, he thinks this could be the perfect opportunity. Bobby has always wanted to open a music hall, a nightclub suited for his particular style of country, and wandering the ballroom and gazing at the now empty bar of this former rock and roll venue, he can visualize exactly what he's been dreaming about for all these years. So after the tour, with a few moments of thought, he decides to purchase it. But little did he know, he was purchasing so much more than he had bargained for. Later that day, Bobby would return with Janet to show her the place that they were now in the process of purchasing. From the moment she laid eyes on the property, Janet felt that there was something ominous about it. An energy about the place just felt off. After unlocking the front door and stepping inside for the first time, and upon surveying the inside with Bobby, at her husband's recommendation, she went into the kitchen alone while he grabbed some items from their truck. As she walked around looking at the various equipment, she began to hear a muffled voice calling out from the sink. A gargled, female voice. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't make out what it was trying to say. As she experienced this, it deeply disturbed her. Calling out for Bobby, she heard nothing in response. She then ran out the kitchen doors and into the ballroom, where she could see Bobby starting to walk back in through the main doors. She asked who he was talking to, and he said no one, that it was just him and her and the entire building. Saying that she heard voices, Bobby dismissed her, thinking that perhaps hormones were affecting her on account of the pregnancy. She again would let him know that she didn't have a good feeling about the building, and time would tell that she would be right. Although his wife disapproved and wanted the two of them to sleep on the idea some more, Bobby, transfixed by the vision he had for a literal dream come true scenario, In his own words, "I couldn't be stopped. I had to have the place." Shortly after this conversation would take place, he would sign the paperwork, attain the banknote, and officially own the property. Upon signing his name on the dotted line, Bobby never looks back. Although Janice didn't want him to, she still tries to be a supportive wife. Although something frightens her about the place, she still assists Bobby with mild renovations as she can. One day, as Bobby paints some walls and Janice sweeps around the bar, a stranger walks through the front doors of the music hall. Introducing himself as Carl Lawson, he tells Bobby that he noticed that he was the new owner and that he had worked for the previous owners as a handyman, but had unfortunately been out of a job ever since the club had closed, due to several particularly brutal murders taking place upon its grounds. In later interviews, he would say this: "Any bar or nightclub is going to have its fair share of fights, but the amount of violence that seemed to take place here, the type of crowd it attracted, seemed abnormal to me." The last year the club was previously open was the most brutal, with 6 homicides taking place. Upon hearing Carl's story, Bobby quickly dismissed the idea of the nightclub becoming a hotspot for violence. He believed that the type of music was what could have caused people to be more violent, and since the club was going to play traditional country music and not anything rock-related, he believed it would attract a very different crowd. After a brief inquiry about his skill set, Bobby decides to hire Carl as a full-time caretaker and handyman for the nightclub. In due time, as per their arrangement, he would live in the attic of the property. As the renovations ramped up to get the club ready for opening, Carl and Janice found themselves working on projects together throughout the building. They began to get along, and their friendship was like a big sister and a little brother. One afternoon, Janice asked Carl if he had ever experienced anything strange inside the club, and to her surprise, he told her that he believed that there was so much more than met the eye about this place, that there was some kind of force that made people violent here, and that the two of them should keep a lookout for one another. Following this brief conversation, Carl would go back to painting walls near the stage, and Janice would resume washing dishes in the kitchen. As she toiled away, she began to hear an all too familiar sound, a muffled, gurgling kind of sound, similar to what she had heard the very first time that she had visited the property. To her absolute horror, she glanced down into the sink that the sound was emanating from and saw a thick, blood-like liquid guzzling up from the drain. It then began to fill up the sink. As she stepped backwards, preparing to call for Carl's help, she felt someone or something grab the back of her head and physically push her towards the sink. For what seemed like an eternity, she braced herself with her hands against the sink as she screamed for help, only to feel the pressure released as soon as Carl ran into the kitchen. As she fell backwards, she began to hysterically tell Carl about what had just happened, that something had tried to hurt her, and that the sink was full of blood. However, upon examining the sink, Carl didn't see anything, and neither did Janet now. It was completely clean. The two would continue to talk until Janet calmed down. They would also come to the conclusion that whatever presence that dwelled within the walls of this club was not friendly, and it was not playing games. It had become violent. Once she had collected herself, Janet tracked Bobby down and confronted him about what had just happened to her, but he didn't believe her. Thinking his wife had gone crazy, he also called Carl over and told him that he didn't want her filling her head with any more ideas about ghosts. Janet would retort that she in fact asked Carl if he had experienced anything, and not the other way around, but nonetheless, Bobby refused to believe either of them. He didn't believe in ghosts or the paranormal, and his only concern was getting this bar up and running so that he could make his money back. But in due time he would see that perhaps they were right. Within a week of these conversations taking place, another event would happen. A police officer by the name of Larry Hornsby was making his usual patrol rounds, which happened to go by the club. As he drove through the parking lot, he spotted a figure behind the window and the door of the club open. Thinking that someone had broke in, he quickly calls it in and asks for backup to investigate. Once another officer arrives, the pair cautiously make their way inside, with guns drawn and flashlights out. As they scan the bar for the potential burglar, they spot nothing, and they don't hear anything either. If anything, it's eerily quiet. However, that was until music began blasting from behind the stage. What sounded like jazz was being played, and the sounds of people laughing and talking could be heard. As they announced their presence, the officers made their way to where the music was coming from. But as soon as Officer Hornsby threw back the curtain, the music stopped. Unsure of what to make of the situation, the two officers looked at each other and became even more unnerved when the front door slammed shut. They raced through the club and out the front door, ready to pursue whoever they believed to be there. But upon a thorough search, they again would find no one. It's also important to note that there was little to no wind this very night. Hornsby would later say that the two of us were stunned, but I couldn't put it in a report that we had encountered some kind of ghost. I would be the laughingstock, or they'd send me to a psychiatrist. So I simply put that we had gone through the building, but didn't find any burglars. But I know what I heard, and I know what I saw, and I wasn't the only one there. 2 nights following this happening, Officer Hornsby would find himself again outside of the nightclub, but this time for a very different reason. A woman had lost control of her vehicle and hit the light pole in the nightclub's parking lot, a crash that was fatal. Not having anything to cover the body once it was removed from the vehicle, as the officer called it in, a woman tapped him on the shoulder and handed him a tablecloth. She then walked back into the nightclub. Once the scene was clear, accompanied with several officers, Hornsby knocked on the door in hopes of thanking the woman for her assistance. However, the doors were locked and there were no signs of life within the club. The following morning, the officer and his partner would make contact with Bobby Mackey to inform him of what had taken place. Upon telling him of the woman who came out of the club, brought them the tablecloth, and then went back inside, thinking that she was a waitress, Bobby shocked them by telling them that he hadn't hired any staff yet besides Carl Lawson, and that the club would have been completely locked up, and that he and his wife were sound asleep when this event would have occurred. Not sure of what to make of this, the officers simply thanked him and left. Bobby, despite the credibility of the officers, still didn't believe that there was anything supernatural about the nightclub. Later that afternoon, as Carl was changing light bulbs upstairs, he accidentally drops and breaks the last good one that he had. As he walks down the stairs to grab several more, he encounters Janet, who asked what that sound was. Upon telling her, she sends him off while she decides to sweep up the glass at the top of the stairs. As she finishes sweeping the glass into a pile, as she turns to grab the dustpan, she is shoved from behind. Panicked, she begins to hyperventilate because that was close to the edge of the stairs. And suddenly, again, she's pushed, causing her to fall down the stairs. She's found by Carl, who then screams for Bobby, but before he gets to them, Janice tells Carl that something pushed her down those stairs. The three then load up as quickly as they can and rush to the hospital. The fall causes Janet to go into premature labor and give birth to a baby girl weighing only 1 pound and 15 ounces. The next several weeks are tense as the new parents monitor their baby, unsure if she's going to make it. But thankfully, against the odds, she does. Approximately 3 weeks later, as his newly born daughter and wife are released from the hospital, Bobby prepares for the grand opening of what he's amply named Bobby Mackey's Music World. Although he is present physically, he is numb emotionally. He feels as if the world is on his shoulders, because this night could make or break the club's reputation. And coming off the heels of what had just taken place within his family, he was raw to say the least. He overhears a customer talking about ghosts, and that almost sends him over the edge. He quickly finds Carl behind the bar and confronts him. He tells him that he will no longer have a job if he continues to tell customers about ghosts, and that he didn't want to hear any more about it because he has to focus on this business for his family. that he didn't want to hear any more nonsense, and that this hall was to be known for great country music, and not for the ghosts that didn't exist. Although he feels a presence, and although he and Janet have spoken several times about their experiences, between a rock and a hard place, Carl decides to hold his tongue and agree with the man who's paying his salary. Several weeks after the grand opening, Carl would move into the attic above the club, which had since been converted into an apartment of sorts. Another perk of being the handyman at Bobby Mackey's Music World. But as a result of this moving forward, he spends every night there, alone. He felt as if he wasn't just a handyman, but a caretaker of sorts, as if something kept drawing him back to the property, and unless he had a pressing matter to leave, he wouldn't. He would just stay there, protecting the club, watching over it. One night, as he finished stacking chairs on tables around the bar, as he steps towards the light switch to turn them off and head to his loft, he hears a strange noise behind him. Turning to observe where the source could be coming from, he sees the chairs begin to rattle and shake. As he stares in disbelief, the chairs then are flung in all different directions. This terrifies Carl, and he rushes up to his apartment, where he barricades himself in for the night. Over the next several weeks, he's in a state of denial about what he had seen, trying to come to terms with his trauma. Carl takes to cleaning. One night, he finds himself down in the storage room of the club, where he finds a loose board on the floor. Upon prying it out to then replace it, he finds a bundle of old-looking cloth. He picks it up and unravels it in his hands. Inside the cloth is an old journal. As he reads it, he discovers that it belonged to a woman named Johanna, who had been a dancer at the club during the 1930s. Over the next several days, he reads through the entire journal and learns her story. She had fallen in love with a musician who her father despised, and her father had told her that he would kill this man before he'd let him marry her. One day, the man in which she loved suddenly wasn't around the club. He had gone missing, and she had just found out that she was pregnant. Thinking her father had something to do with this, she calculated, planned, and then poisoned her father, and then herself. The final entry in the diary proclaimed that she would roam the halls of the club for all eternity, waiting for her lover to return to her. After finishing her journal while laying in his bed, Carl decided to finally get some sleep, but a storm was brewing outside, but also inside of the club. He wakes up choking and coughing, unable to catch his breath, as lightning illuminates the room and thunder rocks the club. With rain smacking the windows behind his head, Carl finally manages to catch his breath, but he's unable to go back to sleep. And several minutes later, the power goes out. Being the handyman that he is, he grabs a flashlight and makes his way towards the basement where the breaker box is located. As he tries to flip the breaker back, he's unsuccessful and drops his flashlight, which then rolls towards the center of the basement room. Not ever having spent much time down there, upon grabbing his flashlight, Carl stumbles upon a latch that he's never seen before, so as any curious mind would, he decides to open it up. With only the lightning lighting up the room on occasion, along with his flashlight, he discovers what appears to be a well in the basement of Bobby Mackey's. Not sure of what to make of this, he closes the latch back up and begins to make his way towards the breaker box once again. But several feet into making his way back, he's frozen in his tracks. Standing before him are the apparitions of two men, and although he can barely make out their faces, what he can see when the lightning strikes looks menacing. He steps back into the basement room as he begins to hyperventilate with fear. He hears footsteps coming towards him, and then the sound of a woman screaming coming from underneath his feet. He is standing directly over the well. He then feels a presence overtake him, and he loses consciousness. He would open his eyes upon daybreak and would rush back upstairs, returning several minutes later with a blessed vial of holy water that he had in his possession. He believed that if he poured the holy water down the well, that it would help keep whatever evil that was down there from coming back up there. So he does just that, and then returns back upstairs to await to begin the workday with Bobby. However, his actions don't seem to work. Over the course of the next 3 weeks, Carl seems to undergo a radical change in personality. He began to seem darker, more angry, and aggressive, which was a far cry from the timid and easygoing guy that Bobby and Janet had come to know. His moods were becoming unpredictable. Bobby would later say that it got to the point that I wasn't sure which Carl I was talking to on a daily basis. Carl also began to carry a crucifix with him, in hopes of warding off evil that he now believed was coming from the well in the basement and attempting to take over his body. These strange interactions between Bobby, Carl, and Janet prompted multiple arguments between Bobby and Janet, with Janet believing that something spiritual was affecting Carl, and Bobby believing that the two of them were nuts and that he had more important things, like the business, to worry about. Several weeks later, in an attempt to further expand his business's reach, Bobby would film a commercial for his establishment and would have his friend who was a journalist be present, hopefully to get a good article circulating before too long. Upon speaking with his friend Doug Hensley about how things were going after the commercial shoot had finished, Bobby would confide in him that business-wise, things were going pretty good, but that his wife and Carl Lawson couldn't stop talking about ghosts. Although he didn't believe in it, his friend was intrigued. Being a writer, he asked why Bobby had kept this a secret, and his response was that he didn't want the reputation of the music hall being tainted by rumors of ghosts, because a lot of people were scared of ghosts, and it could also affect the type of people who would come. Asking if he could speak with Carl and Janet, Bobby agreed. The following afternoon, Doug would interview Carl and Janet without Bobby being present to try and understand what they thought they were experiencing. Upon asking Carl his thoughts, Doug would be met with a straightforward answer. Carl would tell him that this place is evil. Over the course of the interview, the two would tell him their experiences, including Carl discovering Johanna's diary, the well in the basement, and the two men he saw that stormy night, and that he only continued to stay at the property as its caretaker to protect Janet and Bobby from whatever malevolent force that infested its walls, and that this force, despite his best efforts to leave, always seemed to draw him back. Being a skeptic, but accepting the stories at face value, Doug concluded the interview by thanking them. The following day, he compiled his notes and went to the local library to research the history of the property. Believing that Carl Lawson was schizophrenic, he didn't think any of the information would check out. But as he began to dig, his mind would begin to change. Upon laying eyes on a 19th century article from the Kentucky Post, he was strangely intrigued. In 1897, two men, one by the name of Alonzo Walling and the other by the name of Scott Jackson, were hung for the murder of a woman named Pearl Bryan. Bryan's headless corpse was found near the site of an old slaughterhouse in Wilder. She had been a Sunday school teacher and was 5.5 months pregnant at the time of her demise. Scott Jackson had been a former boyfriend of Pearl's, and Alonzo Walling had been his roommate at dental school. It's alleged that the two attempted to remove the child, but failed, and removed Pearl's head instead in an attempt to keep her from being identified. Rumors quickly circulated that the two were practicing Satanists, and in a ritual sacrifice to Satan himself, killed Pearl and her unborn child. Despite several searches around Kentucky and in the Ohio River, her head was never found. The only things that the killers would tell authorities was that it was in a deep, dark place and would never be seen again. As the two men were asked to give their final words before meeting their own fates at the gallows, Alonzo Walling gave an eerie last couple of sentences. He said that he would come back from hell and haunt everyone involved in his trial and the location where Pearl Bryan's head was. When searching for Pearl's head, bloodhounds led investigators to the old slaughterhouse, and although it was never proven, it was speculated that the two men had disposed of it by dropping it in the old well located in the basement as part of their ritual. The club, now known as Bobby Mackey's Music World, now rests on top of the foundation of that very same slaughterhouse. Between the time it was a slaughterhouse and into the 20th century, before it was a nightclub, there were documented incidents involving law enforcement at the time, catching various groups performing rituals in the basement around that well. They would typically perform blood sacrifices of small animals as offerings, believing it to be a portal of sorts due to how much blood had been spilt and soaked into the land. When the property had been a slaughterhouse, a main drain pipe would guide the blood from the floor, where it would then drain off into the Licking River. Doug began to speculate that the two men Carl had seen that night when he discovered the well could have very well have been the spirits of Alonzo Walling and Scott Jackson, because he believed that the two, for whatever reason, satanic or not, had disposed of her head in that well, and now they haunted the grounds of the club. The mystery also deepens. Through his research, Doug Hensley had gone from a hard skeptic to a convinced believer. He now thought that angry spirits inhabited the grounds of Bobby Mackey's Music World, and through his research, he also noticed a disturbing pattern. Pearl Bryan had been 5.5 months pregnant at the time of her demise. According to her diary entries, Johanna, right before her demise, was 5.5 months pregnant, and Janet had also been 5.5 months pregnant when she was pushed down the stairs. Once he had finished researching and putting the story together with that research, he asked to meet with Bobby, Janet, and Carl. Several weeks later, he would tell them about his convictions as well as this pattern. The pattern in particular, given what Janet had experienced, concerned him the most, which prompted him to ask Bobby to allow them to do something about it. And although he doesn't personally believe in spirits, he's known Doug a long time and knows that he's a sensible person with a good head on his shoulders. So going against his wishes, Bobby gives him the go-ahead to do what he thinks needs to be done. It takes several more weeks, but arrangements are made, and in an effort to bring peace to whatever spirits that seem to be lurking within the nightclub, a psychic by the name of Patricia Michelle is brought in. She was given no prior knowledge of the history or story behind it. Upon her arrival, she met Carl Lawson, and he quickly began to say what he thought was happening within the club. She would ask him to please keep any information to himself, so she wouldn't be influenced as she did her walkthrough. During her time roaming Bobby Mackey's, Patricia would sense and speak with a spirit. Upon asking her name, she was told that it was Johanna. When asking Johanna why she remained here, she was told that she knew that she was dead, but that she had chosen to stay. In regards to what she believed to be taking place there, Patricia Michelle would later say this: "I believe that there are spirits inhabiting Bobby Mackey's establishment, and I believe that they have chosen to stay here rather than move on and face what they believe will be a place where they will burn for all eternity." Upon surveying the basement, she asked to open up the latched board on the floor to reveal the well below. As she stared down into the well, she gasped and told everyone present that there was the head of a woman there. She then fell back and was overcome with a horrible bout of nausea. It was then coupled by cold sweats and the spins until she left the club. Several hours later, she would return once she was feeling able-bodied again to meet with everyone and discuss how she felt about what she had uncovered. As she sat down at the table with Janet, Doug, and Carl, and several of her own people, she noticed that Carl was trembling. She then saw two men standing behind him, and the feeling she got when she saw them was one of overwhelming dread and malice. She believed that these spirits had been oppressing Carl and were trying to wear him down to the point to where they could use his body. Fearing that Carl would soon become possessed, Patricia would recommend that he seek help from a minister to help break this attachment. After divulging the rest of her feelings to everyone, Patricia would then leave. Several days later, Doug would contact and bring in a Pentecostal minister to meet with Carl. Upon stepping foot in the club, the minister told Doug before meeting Carl that this was the most evil place he had ever stepped foot in, that he had been doing this for years and had never seen or felt anything like it. And if Carl was experiencing what he was experiencing, let alone living in a place like this, that he certainly was or was on the cusp of being demonically possessed and needed help immediately. Upon meeting Carl for the first time, he knew what he had said to be true. He then followed Carl into the kitchen, where the two sat at a table together. For his own documentation, he placed a video camera to record their interaction, and then the minister began to pray over him. As he prayed aloud, Carl began to contort and grimace. Then, when asked his name, he spoke back to the preacher in a voice that was not his own. He responded with, "My name is Alonzo, and I pray to no God." The minister then commanded Alonzo to leave Carl's body. Carl then fell back off his chair and onto the floor and began to twist and scream. The minister then called for the other men to come and surround Carl due to his violent outbursts. He didn't want to be injured, nor did he want Carl to injure himself. As the men restrained Carl, he began to scream at them in Latin, which the minister spoke. However, he then went from speaking Latin to speaking English backwards, saying natas ma'ai, natas ma'ai, or forwards, "I am Satan," which they wouldn't know until they watched the tape back later. After an hour of praying and demanding that the spirit leave Carl's body, Carl would scream in what sounded like two men screaming in unison for several seconds, and everyone present felt a cold rush of wind blow past them. As Carl now lay silent, breathing heavily, he would finally come to several minutes later, and he didn't recall what had happened. He would later say that, "When I woke up, everyone was looking at me, and I was on the floor. I didn't know what happened." Several days following the exorcism, Carl would decide that it was time for him to move on. He no longer felt tethered to the property, and said that he began to feel like himself again. He thanked the Mackeys for employing and befriending him, and then left in search of a new opportunity. Following Carl's departure, Janet Mackey did not want to be at the club, given everything that she had experienced, and so she wouldn't be. She would instead opt to stay at home with their now healthy baby girl. And before we get to the end of this perplexing paranormal story, I do have some additional history I'd like to share with you about Bobby Mackeys. So far, we're familiar with Pearl Bryan and the fact that the property was built on the foundation of an old slaughterhouse, and that in between the time of its demolishing and rebuilding as a club, it was a supposed hotbed for satanic cult activity. But upon further investigation, we would also prove Johanna's existence as well. Once it was rebuilt and resold, the club has an interesting story. It would reopen as a roadhouse, and the roadhouse would become an illicit bar and gambling den, known better by the name of Primrose. The Primrose was a speakeasy ran by the mob, and as a result of its owners, it became a hotbed for violence. It would change ownership in the 1950s, and would also change its name to the Latin Quarter. Johanna was a dancer there, and she was also the daughter of the club's owner. She had fallen in love with a singer named Robert Randall and ended up pregnant with his child. Having a strong dislike for Robert, her father found this out and was enraged. He would have Robert killed as a result. Depressed by the death of Robert, Johanna then poisoned herself in the basement, right above where the well was. But despite this research, her diary and her poisoning her father could not be confirmed. The Latin Quarter would remain open until 1978, until a series of shootings and subsequent law enforcement pressure forced it to close its doors. It would then be purchased by Bobby Mackey several months later. To this day, Bobby Mackey still says that he himself has never experienced any supernatural occurrences, but many people who have visited, however, have. A sign now hangs within Bobby Mackey's walls that serves as a warning to all patrons that the club cannot be held liable for anything that happens to them as a result of the ghosts. And despite still not being a believer, given everything that he had seen, his mantra has long since been, "Come for the ghosts and stay for the music." But if Bobby Mackeys was haunted, could there have been a force perhaps keeping him blind to it all, driving and keeping his hunger alive. And if Bobby Mackey's music world is indeed haunted, perhaps underneath its floorboards, deep in the bowels of the basement, inside of the old well, a portal to hell still exists. Whatever evil that lingers there perhaps slithers out of it whenever it feels the proper opportunity to exploit the weak. Don't let it be you.
So I'd mentioned I'm correcting information that I may have gotten incorrect, as well as adding new information to this case as a whole. And with that being said, I'm going to start the process here in no particular order. So Janet Mackey, Bobby's wife during the events portrayed, was one of the first individuals to experience spiritual attack within Bobby Mackey's music world. She was pushed down the stairs as mentioned, but what I don't think I mentioned is that she believed that the spirit who actually attacked her was Alonzo Walling, one of the individuals who was responsible for the death of Pearl Bryan. Janet unfortunately passed away in 2009, and may she rest in peace. Carl Lawson became an integral part of this story as a whole and was allegedly possessed. And now, I have to be entirely honest, having watched all available footage, I don't doubt that he could have perhaps been oppressed by something dark that maybe was stalking him whilst he was working and living at a Bobby Mackey's. However, a lot of what has become a legendary event is speculative at best. And what I mean by that is, frankly, there's some pretty funny parts of the video I'm going to show you if you have a dark sense of humor like I do, of Carl's exorcism, and it's really not all that convincing. I'm going to play some clips here just now, and you can judge things for yourself.
Because he knows that I've got something in me that's greater than him. And I've got something in me that's greater than you, Charlie. You understand that? You understand that? Huh? Oh, no. No.
Carl's fighting.
No.
That silly little son of a bitch.
You listen to me.
That silly little son of a bitchy Carl.
No.
Is fighting me.
Carl is not that. Carl's a good person. Now, it's time for you to leave.
I try to keep him away. From church.
Well,
Ever since he was a little kid, all he wanted to do was go to school and pray. That's all he ever wanted to do. But I got him riding around here on his bicycle one day, and he didn't know what happened to him when he found his $5 in the back.
I know he didn't know what happened to him, but you did. And he entertained you, and now then you're trying to take him over, and you're trying to rule his life, and I'm here to put a stop to it. You understand that? You understand that, Charlie?
Carl's so fucking stupid.
You understand that, Charlie?
He ain't.
You quit telling Carl he's stupid. You hear me? You understand me?
Okay.
Now I'm telling you, it's time for you to leave. Because you know what I have right here. Right here. And you know what it is.
This is a stupid fucking buck.
Yeah. That's what you think. This right here is inside of me, though. And you know it because you recognize it. Isn't it time for Charlie to leave? Huh? It's time for Charlie to leave. Charlie. In the name of Jesus, Charlie, I command you to leave. You understand? You understand, Charlie? Talk to me. Come on.
Carl! Stop, Carl. Carl!
Come on. Now leave him alone. Leave him. Leave him. Leave him. Leave him. Leave him. Yeah. Charlie.
Fuck everybody!
Leave him, Charlie.
Just fuck everybody!
Leave him, Charlie.
He's fine!
Leave him, Charlie.
He's fine, man of God!
Leave him.
We've been here for 1,000 fucking years!
Leave him.
And we're gonna stay here!
I don't care.
You think Carl's worth this whole fucking town?
Leave him.
Do you think?
Now, I will say, take it with a grain of salt here. And I am in no way, shape, or form to clarify, trying to throw dirt on Carl's name or his narrative or anything like that. But if my research is correct, he did struggle with alcoholism, and I'm not entirely sure if that didn't play a role in these events. And really this event in particular, due to his behavior being strange and erratic. Regardless, however, though, it is indicative of his mental state. And I will also say that although I do very much believe in demonic entities, I do believe that religious delusion is very real as well. And there is almost a form of theater at play, in a sense, between Carl and the preacher. Carl as well, unfortunately, passed away in 2012, and may he also rest in peace. Now, the original location of Bobby Mackey's, where all of the events of the original video took place, was deemed structurally unsound and unfortunately has been torn down as of December 2024, which sucks because I found myself in the area several times, like pretty close to Wilder, Kentucky. This was, I believe this was literally right before they tore that old building down. But I always wanted to investigate there, having been very intrigued by this case. But unfortunately, we'll never get the opportunity, along with many others, to investigate it. However, there are plans for a new building to be built in its place. And this building is supposed to reopen for business in 2026. As of now, Bobby Mackey's is operating out of a temporary location in Florence, Kentucky. One of the most pressing questions I think we are left with after re-examining this entire case is, will the new Bobby Mackey's also be haunted? I mean, it'll be built on the same spot. It'll contain artifacts from the original location. So only time will tell. Now, other artifacts, including the well itself, the dance floor stage, and parts of Carl's apartment are now on display at Zach Bagan's Haunted Museum. It's possible that I might miss a thing or two as I re-examine these stories, but I'm also human, so I apologize ahead of time. Now, having gone through the case again and been given new information, what are your thoughts as a whole? Make sure to share them with me down below in the comments, like this video, subscribe, share, and hype if you can. All those things help me out tremendously. Please also consider becoming a patron or channel member, and I'll put the links on screen here and down in the description. And also, please make sure to check out my store for my books and my merchandise. I did just put out my 4th book, which is Stories from the Archives Volume 4, which contains another 10 stories of true paranormal tales and I should say, covers occult figures. So I'm sure you'll enjoy that, especially if you've read the other ones. And with all that aside, I did want to thank you guys for everything, truly. I'd mentioned it a few times in my community post, but I was in a dark spot there for a while, and I am slowly but surely starting to come out of it, and I have a lot more optimism for the future. I've kind of got things more or less sorted in my personal life, so I say that as Luna deeply sighs in the background, of course. So just thank you guys for all of your support and for being so incredible and being such an awesome community. Because at the end of the day, it really helps keep me going. So with that, guys, that's all I've got for now. Thank you all so much. Sound like a broken record here, but this has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. And make sure to stay safe out there and take care. I'll see you next time.